Hello, this is Alex from MIDIsequencing.com, and today we're going to be talking about reverb. We're going to talk about all the different types of reverbs, famous reverbs throughout history, all the different controls on a reverb, how to set up your reverb as a send, or if you want to put it directly on your track as a plugin. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of reverb in general. So let's start by looking at the different types of reverbs. There are basically 5 different types of reverbs. There's your natural room reverberation, there are plate reverbs, there are spring reverbs, there are digital reverbs, and there are convolution reverbs. It all starts with natural reverbs. So how this used to work looked something like this. You would have a singer sing into the mic or whatever instrument you wanted to add reverb to. It would go to your mixing board, and your happy engineer would send it out, literally down into a echo chamber or reverb room. In Abbey Road, it was a basement with a whole bunch of columns that they put up to specifically create a great sounding room. And it would play out of a speaker and bounce around the room. There would be a mic or a series of mics set up, and they would pick up that room noise, and then it would go back into the desk, and the engineer would blend it back in. So that is a form of natural reverb. There's also the reverb sound you would get inside this studio in the live room. And a little bit later, a company called EMT invented the plate reverb. And the plate reverb looks something like this. So it is let's look at the other one because you can see a better picture. It is literally a giant metal plate. The EMT 140 specifically weighed 600 pounds, and they had one of these at Abbey Road too. It sounds something like this. This is a plate reverb. Check 1, a shorter plate, and a shorter plate. And plate reverbs are really great for lead vocals or any like full rich reverb sound that you want. And you can hear these all over the Beatles stuff. You can hear this on Pink Floyd records. It's really on a ton of different records. Universal Audio makes a version of this as well. It didn't take long for them to figure out, after sending sound to a giant metal plate, that they could send sound to a giant metal spring or a little spring. And a spring reverb sounds like this. It sounds like a spring. And the big advantage of a spring reverb is it is a lot cheaper. And this is on a lot of stuff too. They put it in guitar amps. But it is a very distinct sound. If you're using a spring reverb, you want to have a specific reason to use a spring reverb. It's not your average throw it on there type thing. It's definitely a specific sound. It sounds springy. You use it more of an effect type reverb than as a standard reverb. So, a bit later in 1976, the same company that invented the plate reverb invented the EMT 250, the first digital reverb. And how a digital reverb works is it's basically a bunch of delays that gives you the illusion of a reverb. And it sounds like this, or like this, or like this, or like this. You can really make a lot of different sounds with a digital reverb because you can control a whole bunch of the parameters. And this one, when it came out in 1976, cost $15,000, which in today's money would be $62,000. And a couple years later, in 1978, I believe, the Lexicon L22 4 came out. And this reverb became a studio staple. This is in studios all over the world to this day. And you get a bunch of different sounds. It emulates halls. Check 1. Bright hall. Long, dark hall. Inverse room. Ooh. A rich plate. A rich plate that's shorter. So this is a great reverb sound, but it didn't take them too long to come out with the Lexicon L480. This is just the controller. You might have seen a picture of this, or if you've been to a professional studio, you might have seen this sitting on a studio desk. It is a great reverb. It sounds really good. There's a lot of different stuff in here that just sounds cool. And you can see with digital reverbs, they're already basically emulating reverbs of the past. They're either emulating a room or they're emulating a plate. And I don't know if this has any springs in here, but no, they didn't feel like emulating a spring, because why would they? Which brings us back to today. Today, this whole thing, all these reverbs we've been listening to, are inside a convolution reverb. A convolution reverb takes a sample of a reverb called an impulse response, and it emulates that reverb sound with any sound that you send to it. So we are going to look at now an impulse response from the Amsterdam Concertgebouw Concert House. And this concert house is one of the top 3 best sounding concert houses in the world for acoustics. There's one in Vienna, in Boston Symphony Hall. And I've got a dry cello sound set up, and we're sending the sound on a bus 47, into this aux track, which takes in bus 47, and that's where our reverb is. And as I turn it up, you'll hear the reverb come on. Cool, so let's look at some of the parameters in the reverb. We have our reverb time, which is basically the decay of the reverb, how long it takes for the sound to go away, which is 4.87 seconds. If we turn it down, you'll hear the sound goes away quicker. And turn it up, it goes longer. And that's called a reverb tail, how long the sound goes, the decay. If we turn up the size, it's a little bit different. The size actually changes the quality of the reverb. It will get longer, the reverb tail will be longer, but it also just sounds like it's a bigger room. So here's the original. And let's turn it up. Just sounds like it's a bigger place. Now the in, out, and mix controls, this is more if you were putting your reverb directly onto one track. And the reason you might want to set your reverb up on an aux track as opposed to just putting it in as a insert is if we had a whole bunch of different instruments here, we could all send them to the same reverb and it would sound more or less like they're in the same concert hall. And another benefit is that it saves on your processing power. The computer's only processing one instance of the reverb rather than a whole bunch of them. So the ins and outs, the in is how much dry signal is going in. Dry signal is a signal without reverb. The out is how much signal mixed with the reverb. Dry signal is coming out. And then the mix is how much dry versus wet is coming out. So if it's on an aux track, you generally want to just keep it on 100% and control how much reverb there is by moving the send up and down. But if you place it as an insert, you might want to change the mix setting to blend in your reverb. Next, we got the pre-delay. The pre-delay is the difference between when you hear the dry signal versus when you hear the reverb come in. So right now, the reverb's coming in right away. But if we turn it up more, you hear the reverb hits later. If I turn it all the way up, I mean, that's ridiculous, but that is your pre-delay. You hear what it does. And really mess with this if you're adding reverb to something. It can definitely change the quality of the sound. You know, it can make something impact more or be clearer sounding. It's an important aspect of your reverbs. Okay, let's look at putting reverb directly onto a track. I've got these kind of Phil Collins type drum sound. And the reason that I want to put the reverb directly on is because I'm compressing the reverb onto this specific sound. So if you have a track that you want the reverb really to be blended in there with, so it's like a big impactful sound, you might want to compress your reverb on there. You can also EQ your reverbs, you can distort your reverbs, you can add delays to your reverbs. Adding different effects to your reverbs really can change things up. It's a good trick to use when mixing, and just experiment with that to try and get different sounds. I actually made a whole video about how to mix these drums. I'll put the link in the description, so check that out. That is your basic overview of reverbs, its parameters, its history, all the different types. Please come by midisequencing.com. I'm going to do more of these mixing essentials where we go over standard tools that people use for mixing in the studio and how they work, their histories, different parameters, and ways that you use them. Come on by midisequencing.com for more articles and different gear reviews. Please like and subscribe. Peace.